please help me welcome Billy Bragg and David Weigel.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do we follow that, Dave?
Thanks a lot. Well,
that's going to be tough.
I have read the book. I'll start with the question that would work if I hadn't, which is why did you write the book? What made you want to sit down and do this?
Well, writing songs only gets you so far, and if you want to sort of insert yourself into the zeitgeist, I suppose you need to do a little bit more than just come up with some new tunes. Mm-hmm. There was a time I could insert myself into the zeitgeist by writing songs, but that was probably 25 years ago. Now I need to do something a little bit more heavyweight. So my publishers asked me if I'd be interested in contributing to this series of polemical short books they're doing, and I'd just given a talk at the Bank of England in London about
where you're very popular.
I am. I am.
They distribute your CDs with a new account. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were inviting people in to talk, outside of their normal experience, to the staff, really, to the staff. So I talked about accountability, the problems that we have in how we do. Are you familiar with quantitative easing, David?
Actually, unfortunately, all are now. Yes, I'm familiar with it, yeah.
They were a progressive band from Somerset in the... How that works in my country is that the government just says the Bank of England give the money away, doesn't say where it should go. And the banks have just kept it to shore up their bottom line. So I was making the case that there should be more accountability around that. And so when I was asked if I was interested in writing one of these little books, I thought that this would be a good subject to crack it on. And also there's only so many words that rhyme with accountability.
Mm-hmm. and so...
Unless you're in a prog rock band, of course, then obviously... They shouldn't have told me that, Dave. They really shouldn't have told me that.
So... The accountability section, I think we'll get to it. It's the most, I think, the one with the most prescriptions in the book. The question I had while reading it, though, is when did you first realize that there might be a problem with the freedom people were getting because of the new infrastructure of the internet and the new structure of the media?
It was quite early on, really around the time of the anti-globalization movement in the late 90s. That kind of helped me understand that neoliberalism, the idea that the markets have the answers to all of society's problems if left to their own devices, was a complete rejection of accountability. And that once you kind of spot where accountability is missing, you realise that's a hole in a lot of donuts there. And so consequently, I've been trying to tune in to those places where there isn't enough accountability. And I think for the purposes of the book, I'm trying to refer both to the kind of the way that we deal with neoliberalism, with authoritarianism, with algorithms, but also on a much more personal level. I'm trying to provide a framework in which to address issues around our discourse on social media, where there's not enough accountability there, both between individual conversations, but also as a whole on the whole setup.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of how I encountered your work originally. I was getting familiar with you when the Labour Party had just won election in 1997. It was going to win another in 2001. What was your journey in discovering how deeply neoliberal thinking had gotten into the Labour Party, which you're a member for before that?
Well, I was a member in the 80s, not so much in the 1990s. Yeah. But it was unfortunate, really, that the Blair government didn't reverse the Margaret Thatcher's notions of neoliberalism. But the thing really came home to me when I was doing a live TV program for a lunchtime discussion program on the BBC. And I was waiting to go on and say a few words or maybe play a song, I don't remember, but there was a Conservative minister being interviewed live in front of me. And the a presenter asked this guy if there would be the possibility of raising what we call children's allowance, which is the amount of money that we give to families who have children. And he said, we'll have to see what the bond markets think about that. And I thought to myself, I don't remember voting for no bond markets. And I started to think that there's a sleight of hand here going on for those who believe in the neoliberal dogma that the market has the answer to all our problems. And consequently, with the rise of Donald Trump, with Brexit, the whole notion of accountability seems to have gone out the window.
And you characterize it in the book as that there is no alternative mode of thinking. That Thatcher coins this phrase and then Labour adopts it.
Tina. There is no alternative.
Much cuddlier acronym than it probably deserves.
Yeah, much cuddlier. But Thatcher was the first person to coin that phrase with regard to free market capitalism. But Blair, unfortunately, came in and kind of ran that through, not just through our society, but through our labour movement as well, through the Labour Party as well, took away the fundamental founding principles of the party and replaced them with much more market-oriented ideas. And we're living with the results of that still. And
how much would you pin the problems on those decisions on labour abandoning its principles, how much on what was unleashed by the internet, the lack of accountability? I mean, they work together, but
they do.
The Labour goal, I thought Blair's goal is just to keep it going forever and make the Labour Party the majority of government by continuing to give up on some of the left-wing policies.
Yeah, that was his and Gordon Brown, the Chancellor's idea, that they would free the market, and the success of that would cause, well, what you Americans refer to as trickle down. It was kind of like a fancy notion of trickle down. But we now know that that's a false ideology that hasn't worked. And we're left in a situation where we've yet to rectify the problems that this has caused. And I think very much in my country, Brexit is a manifestation of anger from people that have been left by neoliberalism with no genuine sense of agency about their lives. And this lack of agency has led them to start lashing out at people. In our country, the obvious victim is the European Union. But also it's about immigrants. It's about those people who are having to rely on the state to provide for them. Anybody except the people who voted for neoliberalism in the first place.
So why do you think there has been such resistance to instituting accountability or a fairness doctrine? You write in the book about the fairness doctrine that exists in the United States, and you write about why it was scrapped. Why, starting with the UK, why has there not been more of an effort to restrict that? Because I like our First Amendment for a lot of reasons, but it is a tool that other countries that don't have, and there have been clampdowns on right-wing speech and organizing in other countries for that reason.
Well, I mean, the BBC in its charter has to provide balance, but then that involves a situation where you have 90% of scientists saying that climate change exists. Is it really balanced to get some crazy person on there to say they don't believe in it? Is that really balance, or are you bringing an extreme view into a situation which there's a very, very broad rational consensus about? So there have been complaints with regard to the way the BBC has addressed both issues like climate change, particularly Brexit. Today I was being interviewed by someone from the Daily Telegraph was asking me about this.
No cheers to the Daily Telegraph. I'm very surprised,
Yeah, exactly. Surprise, surprise. But the fundamental aspect of it is, I think, is that social media has opened up the ability of people to find whatever truth they want to find. The fact that there are enough people believing that the earth is flat to fill a cruise ship, to sail around the Caribbean using GPS on 3 parts of the globe to work out where their position is, doesn't go there. It just goes to show you how far away from the rational worldview we've come. And what we do to counter that, I think, is we have to draw a line in the sand. And that line, I believe, that line is the line of accountability. We have to make these people accountable for for the views that they're holding, not just allow them to say whatever they think and to say that's their truth. We have to find a way to make them accountable. And I would argue this is not a left or right-wing argument either. I mean, I know I'm talking a lot about neoliberalism, but this is an argument that works both ways, I think. You know, that greater accountability ultimately serves us all because it serves fact, it serves truth, it serves reality.
The worry about accountability, the fairness doctrine, maybe this is a worry that we've learned because this is what we're used to, is the more you say, here's what you can't have, the more people want to speak outside of it. I mean, the discussion over the last week, they were probably the same discussion last week about whether people who are being criticized for their jokes and stand-up specials, they're going to become more popular. There's going to be a greater audience for that. So what is your response to if you have more accountability, you're just going to lead to more black market popular opinion?
Well, I think, you know, people have to be accountable for what they say. Stand-up comedians have to be accountable for what they say. You know, if they're not, that's not liberty, that's license. You know, that's not really the kind of standards that we want to set. Yeah, you've got a right to offend people. Yeah, you've got a right to speak your truth, but you don't have a right to be abusive. And I think that's where is that line? I think that line is where things become personal. That line is where things, where comment shifts into bullying, and it's a hard line. And there's no hard and fast lines on it because I think accountability works on a number of different levels. You know, you have the personal accountability that we might bring to bear in social media when we're trying to hold someone to account for what they're saying. You've got what you might call proprietorial accountability, where Saturday Night Live says, when we don't want this person on our show, we're not going to employ this person. That person can still, is it Gillis Willis?
I've already forgotten his name, which is a good sign for him.
Yeah, good. And, you know, it's that's their right. It's not censorship. Just because the New York Post doesn't print everything you say, that doesn't mean you're being censored. You know, that's a different thing. But then also there's a legal side to it, where how far does freedom of speech go? Earlier this year in the UK, a man was jailed for daubing on the front door of a black family in the UK the words "No blacks here." I don't think anybody in this room would believe that constitutes an infringement of his freedom of speech. That's unacceptable, and there are laws against that sort of thing, and he rightly went to jail for it.
Have you seen anything in this new media infrastructure that's been an effective way of getting accountability? I'm thinking of the idea of no platforming, of somebody saying, that's right, you can have your neo-Nazi website, you can't bank here, you can't be hosted by this. They've effectively driven people off the internet. Is that a model you think that works?
This kind of brings us on to the sort of safe space model, you know, the idea of the safe space. Now, from what I understand from I don't know if this applies to the United States of America, but certainly in the UK, the rules around safe spaces in universities are clearly geared to ensuring debate happens. They're not about stopping the debate. They're just about ensuring that everybody gets the right to speak and everybody is heard with respect. So those people who just want to come and wind people up, those people who just want to come up and be provocative, the Milos of this world, are going to find themselves running into trouble on those rules. But as we've found out with Saturday Night Live, my house, my rules. If you're going into that space, you have to accept those debating rules. You're not being censored if you're just not allowed to speak at that particular university. So I think safe space encourages free speech rather than restricting it.
So you already started to talk about this and talking about the BBC's charter, but in the UK there are pretty strict limits on what you can say during a campaign, how much you can spend. There are strict limits in lots of countries. Here it's unfettered. Yeah. And we have had the same sort of rise of inward-looking nationalism and populism in both countries. What does that tell you about the ability of all of this to break free, whatever restrictions there are?
Well, undoubtedly the problems of political advertising in the United States of America are distorting your democracy, because the amount of money it costs to run campaigns and the ability of corporations to to mount campaigns against particular people, particular ideas. In the UK, there is no political advertising. It's not allowed. But this restriction only applies to traditional media. It doesn't apply to Facebook. It doesn't apply to the new media. And this is a real problem. We have a real problem on this, particularly around Brexit. There were a lot of advertising the last couple of days of the referendum by Leave.eu, who are not the official campaign. It looks like they spent a few £1 million saturating people whose profiles they understood to be possibly inclined towards supporting a Leave vote. If you're familiar with Cambridge Analytica, you know those guys.
Oh yeah, that was the muttering I was waiting for.
Oh yeah,
people are familiar with that. Yeah,
yeah. They basically asked a load of questions of people, a kind of profile for them to fill in for fun. One of the questions also was, you know, how would you vote? And from that idea of how they voted, using that as a pinpoint, they were able to extrapolate from that the profiles, the dots that join to find those people who would vote Leave and and they applied those to millions of websites and sent out millions of targeted ads. And even if a small percentage of those were successful, I think that was a perversion of our democracy. So this is where accountability comes in again, because it has to be applied to Facebook the same as anybody else. How do we hold those people to account?
But if that worked for the Leave campaign, what is to stop the left? And I think the Bernie Sanders campaign, this country has some ideas about this. They're trying to activate a lot of working class people who don't vote, who have disrupt the rolls. What is to stop the left from using the exact same tools?
Well, the thing about the Cambridge Analytica tool is that it didn't involve the consent of the people it was targeting. If providing consent is involved, I think that's fair. You know, but this wasn't consensual. This was snaffling information under false pretenses and exploiting it. And I think there have to be rules against that sort of thing.
And when it comes to, I don't know how many questions there are in the audience. Probably some. We don't have the microphones, which make it harder to look. Does anyone have other hands for anyone who would want to ask something?
We can press on. Don't worry.
Just lift people up. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we can do that.
There's one.
Yes, ma'am. Give us a shout. Just shout it out.
First of all, thank you very much for talking about accountability.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So if we go to the highest levels of governance and we have leaders who do not want to be accountable, how do we deal with that as just citizens where we're trying to fight against this huge wall of everything you described?
How do we deal with politicians who don't want to be held to account? We're finding this out in Britain at the moment, actually, with our Prime Minister, who over the weekend described himself as the Incredible Hulk, that as he got angry, he would get more powerful. And today, he was empty-chaired by the Prime Minister of Luxembourg when he refused to do a press conference after meeting with the European top dogs. It turns out he's not the Incredible Hulk; he's the Invisible Man. So this is, which is sad, because the Invisible Man isn't even a Marvel franchise. It would have been so much better, but couldn't call him Invisible Girl. That's not fair. That's overstepping a line. I don't want to go there. It's a problem, madam. It's a problem. I think one of the difficulties that we labour under is that most people think of democracy as synonymous with accountability. It's not. Not in your country, not in my country. I'll tell you why. Where I live, we have a system of election for our parliament in the UK, which is called first past the post, which means whoever gets the most votes gets the seat. If 3 of us are standing and 2 get 30%, I get 40%, I get the seat. And those 60% of votes for the other 2 candidates go in the trash. They go in the trash. It's not proportional. Where I live in West Dorset, the Conservative Party have been in control there since 1866. Where I come from, in industrial East London, the Labour Party have been in control since 1931 when the town was forged as a borough. And I know for a fact that there are Conservatives in Barking where I come from because I'm related to some of them. So it's neither fair to them nor is it fair to those of us down in West Dorset. So the relationship between democracy and accountability is more akin to a Venn diagram than it is to anything else. Sometimes when there's a lot of consensus in a place, then the two of them overlap. But at the moment when things are much more divisive, then the two of them are starting to drift apart. And we have to. It's a challenge to find a way in which to hold our politicians more to account. I've never understood why there isn't more argument for a more proportional voting system here in the United States of America. You know, a young country like yours, a progressive country like yours, I would have thought you'd have got that sorted out a long time ago. But proportional representation, no political advertising, maybe, I mean, I hate to say this, but a couple more political parties might ease things up a bit.
Well, we're still figuring out the person who gets more votes wins thing. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah.
But on accountability, though, I'm putting myself in the position of one of the very friendly Tories who might yell at you on a TV show. Yeah. What are you saying? Is it if I'm an MP or if I'm an average person, I say something that you find offensive, I'm going to jail, I'm paying a fine, I'm bankrupt? What is the What is the accountability mechanism?
Well, as I say, it works on a number of different levels. Obviously, on a very personal level, I can block you. Yeah. That kind of, you know, that's one way of dealing with it. I try not to do that. I try to deal with people, reason with people, but I understand why people do like to block people. You know, you can lose your gig, as our friend has done at Saturday Night Live. But there are some extreme cases where you can go to jail. There are laws against hate speech in my country, and you can go, as there are in most European countries, and you know, you can go to jail for those things, and I think rightly so too. Mm-hmm.
And whether there's there's a mic now. Oh,
let's try this mic while it works. So if anybody has a question, come on up.
But maybe I'll wind you up a little bit more. And
there wasn't a mic when you were telling the jokes earlier.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Well, I mean, it's really basically what I'm trying to get a handle on. You come with a question, mate, before I go off on one, or you going to the loo? That's a question.
That'd be bad if it was. Yeah.
As someone who hasn't read the book,
and
for people who might be watching and whatever, so is the book primarily focused on the three dimensions of freedom, universal, or do you have a UK central sort of theme going?
Universal, brother. It's on universal.
That's what I was assuming, but by the talk, I just wanted to make sure people realized it was.
Oh, you can blame me for that. Yeah,
no, I think it's fair enough, as we are in the United States, and. I mean, basically, I'm arguing that the definition of liberty as the right to say whatever you want to say to whoever you want to say it is not sufficient to protect us from authoritarianism, from algorithms, and from neoliberalism. That fundamentally there are more important aspects to liberty. The BBC in London, they have a new building, and they've built a statue to one of their ex-employees outside, George Orwell, Eric Arthur Blair. And they've chosen a quote from Orwell to carve into the wall of their new building. And the quote is, "If liberty means anything, it means the right to tell people what they don't want to hear." Now, I have a problem with that, because people don't want to hear 2 + 2 = 5. That quote doesn't seem to me to be a guarantee of liberty. It seems to me to be a guarantee of license to say whatever you want to say. So my argument really, in terms of the three dimensions, is that the right to say whatever you want to say, whenever you want to say it to whoever you want to say with no comeback, that's not liberty. If it were liberty, then your president's Twitter feed would be the most, the most greatest expression of freedom that anyone's ever known. Clearly that's not the case. What also needs to be present is equality. Equality, not just in the right for everybody to express their view, but the right for them to be heard with respect, for their voice to be heard with respect and you to respond to them. And the crucial aspect of that is that it's reciprocal. It's something that you have a duty in a free society to do. So on one hand, liberty empowers you to express your view, whatever that view is. But equality requires you to reciprocate that right to others, to people you don't agree with. The famous quote by Voltaire that he never actually said, "I disagree with what you're saying, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it," is not actually a defense of free speech. It's a statement of equality, that you are willing to lay down your life for the right of that person to be heard and respected. Equality is the second dimension of freedom, and without it, I would argue that liberty is nothing more than privilege. But having got equality along with liberty, we're still in a situation where everybody has the right to say 2 + 2 = 5. And we need to find a way to address that. And that's where accountability comes in. That's where accountability gives freedom its teeth. And the great thing about accountability is it is both empowering to you to hold others to account, but it's also reciprocal in that it requires you to be accountable for your actions. And accountability is not the same as responsibility. Responsibility belongs to you. It's an action that you take. You hold yourself responsible for the things that you have done. Accountability involves a third party having some say over your conduct and your behavior by its nature. And I think that's what gives that idea of freedom, the three-dimensional idea of freedom, some teeth. Because instead of saying we'll wait for corporate responsibility, instead we have corporate accountability. That we, the people, are able to hold the powerful to account on our terms rather than on their terms. So this three-dimensional version of freedom is an attempt to create a space in which we can have our discourse, have a social discourse, a fair discourse, but also to give us a framework that allows us to judge, if you like, if that's the right word, or understand the situation that we're dealing with. In the 20th century, some of us are old enough to remember, ideology did that job. Whatever your ideology was, you had an ideology, you looked at an issue, you looked at it in that framework, and you worked out where you sat with regard to that. That's kind of gone now. We live in a post-ideological world. But we still need a framework in this blizzard of information that we deal with every day to work out which side we're on and how to judge the person or the information that we're dealing with. And what I'm trying to do with the book is set up some parameters that can help to give us our bearings in regard to the information that we're receiving. It's not the tools. I'm not sure what the tools are. I just would add, I'm not offering tools. I'm just kind of trying to offer a kind of a framework with which to find the tools, with which to be able to hold, particularly be able to hold the powerful to account.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for being patient. Sorry, mate, I went off on one there. I do apologise.
I was fascinated. I want to ask you a Brexit question. I've sort of been following it since its inception. One thing is, it's amazing that the English are as dumb as we are, but
I'll be British, mate. Not I'm taking it personal,
okay,
but
I know.
no, it's actually true.
I know the difference.
No, it's true. It is an English phenomenon. You're right.
Yeah, the North isn't quite as dumb, but it's a quandary they're in now because of the No Deal nonsense. That supposedly people who voted Brexit say they always voted No Deal now. That's kind of the line lately. I mean, Labour's been muddled on how to handle it. What do you think Labour should do going forward? Some people have espoused in England that Jeremy Corbyn basically just wants to destroy the Tory party, and that he's allowing them to kind of destroy themselves. So part of his approach he's taking pretty much lets this happen. But there's also a chance that Great Britain will break up, with Scotland and Ireland breaking off from being part of the Union. So what's your thoughts of those things, if you have any?
Well, you know, we don't play as Great Britain in the World Cup. That's never hurt us. It's sort of like, you know. It is true. It is true that Brexit could just destroy the Conservative Party, but it could also destroy the Labour Party as well. It's incredibly toxic. It's incredibly toxic. But with regard to Labour's position, there was a strange development at the weekend in that the Liberal Democrat Party, who are our third party, they usually poll about 10 to 15% in elections. They are strongly identifying with the Remain position. They decided at their conference of the weekend that if they win the next election, they will simply abandon Brexit without a referendum. Just call it off. They can do that technically by revoking something called Article 50, which was the thing we used to set the whole thing in motion. Their policy now is to revoke Article 50, which in some ways is kind of an extreme position, because it says to the 52% who voted leave, we don't really care what you think. We're not doing this. So we've got the Liberal Democrats on one extreme. We've got the Tories on the other extreme with no deal, because that's what they're going to have to really go for that, because if they don't go for no deal, a populist insurgent party called the Brexit Party will stand against them if they're not offering no deal. So the Labour Party, who are offering another referendum with Remain on the ballot, so if you wish to remain, you'll have options to vote that. Obviously, there has to be a leave option for those, and they're going to negotiate another deal. So with the two other parties at the extremes, Corbyn now seems to be offering, I hate to use this word, but Corbyn is now in the centrist position.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's kind of strange, because he's got so much grief for basically trying to deal with the fact that, like the rest of the country, the Labour Party is split between Leavers and Remainers, and he has to deal with that reality. His parliamentary party is split along the same lines. But what we need is another referendum. And with Labour Party offering a referendum with Remain on the ballot, I think we're in a good position to pick up a lot of votes there, because I feel the Liberal Democrats, by saying, I mean, I know it's strange to think, but their actual campaign slogan during the recent European elections, which is the elections for the European Parliament, their campaign slogan was "bollocks to Brexit." And now they're going to go into the general election when their campaign slogan is going to be "bollocks to a second referendum." It seems to me that's neither liberal nor particularly democratic.
Yeah.
So, but the looking glass, Alice in Wonderland world of Brexit, anything could happen, mate. Anything could happen.
Well, and end with this. The last thing I heard is the EU at this point is like, want to go? Good riddance.
Yeah,
so that's operating too.
Let's not hope. I hope it doesn't come to that.
Got another one?
Hello, mate.
Hi. I also have a Brexit-related question. You mentioned that one of the reasons for Brexit was that there were people who were left behind, which is true. But on the other hand, if Brexit happens, those people would still be left behind. Their situation won't be better by an inch, or most likely it would be worse, which creates the next good possibility for the next right-wing populist. So isn't it an endless cycle or infinite loop kind of thing?
It is indeed an endless cycle, and it leaves them with no one external to blame. That's the problem. Then people will have to start looking at their own choices. But we have a problem. It's not really a problem, but we have a historical reality in the United Kingdom that other European nations don't have. Almost every country that joined the European Union did so to escape from a past in which they were in some kind of trouble. Germany and France is the obvious example there. Spain and Portugal to escape from dictatorship. The Irish to escape from, the shadow of Great Britain. The Low Countries to punch above their weight. Obviously, the Eastern European countries to escape from totalitarianism. But we British, we were kind of coming at it from being the kings of the world. And psychologically, I'm afraid, when someone like Boris Johnson sits down with the other 27 nations to discuss things, he has a terrible feeling that somehow he's part of somebody else's empire. And this psychological problem is going to be the ruination of us, because that world that we did have that role in no longer exists. Make Britain great again is not a viable position. In fact, if anything, Brexit is us admitting that we are no longer can live up to that, and that we're returning to something that we refer to at home as Little England. And it's very sad to see this, because our history, we have a great history as a country, and we are a great country, but we're no longer a great power, and we've yet to come to terms with that. So I think Brexit is as much as part of that as what you've just discussed about the people who are left behind. Thank you. If you come to the mic, everyone can hear you. Go on, son. Go on. Go on.
It's new. We just found it. Yeah.
So you've kind of outlined in your last few responses how Labour and Corbyn have found themselves in this position where there's tremendous potential. There's kind of a parallel in the United States, like with, I guess a leftist kind of populist movement having real, the goalpost being very...
The Overton window has moved, hasn't it?
Yes, exactly, yes. So my question is, are you optimistic? How optimistic are you that this kind of chaotic moment, not just limited to the UK or the US, do you think that an actual solution can be cleared? Like, there's a path forward, or I mean, how realistic or optimistic are you?
Well, I'm a socialist by definition. And I think if you're a socialist, you have to be an optimist. If you can't see that the glass is half full, you can't really go out there and believe that if the majority of people got to say things would be better. Those people who think the glass is half empty, they're the people who, get out of bed in the morning and think the world is against them. I've never been of that state of mind. And I've been coming to the United States of America since 1984. Long time ago. I would never, ever have believed that someone who declares themselves to be a democratic socialist will get anywhere near the presidency, not only on the debates, and seeing people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez becoming so popular. I am optimistic. I am optimistic, and I tell you, the young generation of climate campaigners, the school strikers, Greta Thunberg, they fill me with joy. They're the new punk rock, mate. They really are. Because the thing about punk rock was it was self-empowering. It was self-empowering, and that's where they are. They're getting up there. No one's telling them to get up there. They're doing it of their own accord. So yeah, I am optimistic, and I think that is the paradox of it all. Is it takes someone like Trump or something like Brexit to get people to engage properly, and so consequently, I have to tell you, I have to curb my cynicism. I have to act really hard to do that, because I think for those of us who want to make the world a better place, our true enemy is not capitalism or conservatism, it's cynicism. And by that I mean our own cynicism, not Rupert Murdoch's cynicism, not the Daily Mail cynicism, but our own cynicism. And I'm in a very privileged position, mate, because I go out every night and lay down my politics, everyone claps and cheers, and I feel a lot better about it, you know? So you can understand what that, but my job, I see my job as to make, because when I come off stage, my activism is charged up. But my job is to make the audience go away with their activism charged up too. To not just to me out to have it all, because it's a great feeling, but to make sure that they go away feeling that there's a room full of people in Arlington, Virginia, who give a shit about this stuff. That's been my job down at that Birchmere on later this week.
Thank you.
Radical optimism, mate.
Yeah, trying to curb my cynicism every day.
Kick it to the curb, brother.
If I could follow up quickly as the next question comes up, though, what do you say to the slippery slope argument? Because when activism has built up in this country, people will use laws to censor them, to restrict the movement. That's already happened in some places. If a college gets unruly, they start to restrict what the professors can say. I guess one argument for just total liberalism when it comes to speech is if you're not for it, you're going to get the right will come in, crack down on it using the same ethos. Obviously, the book argues for what the principles you're defending are, so that solves it. But how much do you worry about using the same arguments to say, well, here it's time to get these radical anti-meat people out of the public sphere because they're hurting our industries?
I think you have to take on those challenges. You have to face these people down. Mm-hmm. You know, we do all now have a platform. You know, we are able to circumnavigate the old mainstream media. I mean, you know, the reason music no longer has a vanguard role in popular culture is because when I was 19 and I wanted people in Washington, D.C. to hear what I had to say, I only had one medium available to me. I had to learn to play guitar, write songs, come and do gigs. Now, if you're 19 and you've got some ideas, you know, you can do a number of different things. You can make a film on your phone and edit it if you want to. So music no longer has that kind of vanguard role. But there is something that people still want, and that is the communion of coming together to have an experience, the sort of solidarity of song, if you like. You know, it doesn't have to be political either. It can be, you know, any kind of concert. You get that feeling that everybody's there for a single purpose, and politics offers you that. Politics offers you the opportunity to march. I mean, you have a demonstration on Sunday, We the People, here in Washington, D.C. I come from a country where we don't have a single document that begins We the People. You know, but our constitution doesn't exist. It's not there, as Boris Johnson is showing at the moment, by driving a forklift truck right down the middle of it. And so, consequently, these ideas that travel and they are empowering, and we shouldn't be afraid of them to stand up and take on those people who would try to shut us up. Mm-hmm.
And I silence. You've been waiting a bit. So
yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
So we'll have these last two questions right here.
Okay, well, what I'm concerned about, and I want you to address, is the individual accountability. Like, for example, in Brexit, there was a 52% vote, and then the internet went crazy the next day, people finding out what is Brexit. So people are not thinking anymore because there's such a bombardment of media and social media, and the same thing in this country. People who voted for Trump feel like they get a pass, you know, that you know what I mean? They don't feel like they're responsible for anything that's happening. So people have to think about being accountable before they submit their vote.
Well, I'll come at it from another angle, and I would say that what your country and my country both lack are mechanisms for change, the change that people want, that gives them a sense of agency over their lives. And one of the problems I had with the candidacy of Hillary Clinton was she was clearly not a change candidate at a time when people wanted change, where they felt that they'd been let down by capitalism and they needed a change candidate. And Trump became that candidate because he was willing to say whatever came into his head at any time. And in many ways, Brexit could similarly be whatever you wanted it to be. It could be about sovereignty. It could be about democracy. It could be about immigration. It could be about the British Empire. So our need is to give ordinary citizens feel that they have some degree of agency over their lives. How do you do that? Do you devolve power closer to them? Do you, I would argue, you have to ensure that their vote counts, that their votes don't go in the bin when they don't elect, a candidate, so that everybody's voice is heard. A plural democracy is a healthy democracy. A democracy which ultimately relies on people making compromises is a route to a society that's more at ease with itself, that we can get a broader sense of opinion there. A two-party system, or a system dominated by two parties like yours and ours, doesn't necessarily give you that opportunity. So I think that's where the problem is, not with the way those people voted, but the sense of anger that led them to make the choices that they made. That's where the problem lies for me. And that's why just abandoning Brexit isn't going to address those problems. We're still going to have those problems in our society. We've got to find a way to deal with them. Ideally, what I would like to do, which nobody's talking about, so I have to unfortunately address the issues as they are rather than I would like them to be, is the notion of a citizens' assembly. I don't know if you're familiar with these notions. Do you have them here in the United States at all? Basically, a couple of years ago, the Irish decided to get to grips with the issue of abortion, the legality of abortion in their country. For a long time, the Catholic Church had a stranglehold on the debate around women's rights, and they decided to set up a citizens' assembly to address this. They took a load of people, they randomly selected them in a way that reflected the demographics of the nation in age and ethnicity and politics and religion. They sent them away to a hotel for weekends, 3 or 4 or 5 weekends. They took evidence from experts and submissions from the general public. No politicians were involved. They sat down in small groups to discuss these things. After they'd been spoken to, every participant had to write down what they'd just been told, so that everyone stood they understood it. The whole thing was broadcast on the internet, so everyone could listen to what was going on and ensure that everyone's point of view got expressed. And at the end of it, they recommended by 65% to 35% that there should be a relaxation of the laws on abortion to bring them in line with those in the UK and the European Union. So the Irish government took that information, had a referendum on it, and it more or less came out the same, 65-35 in favour. So it won't work on everything, but what you need to do is find a way to do two things: deliberate and build consensus. Now, if we could have a citizens' assembly around the argument of Brexit, it may be that they recommend another referendum. And if they did, that would be positive, because it would come from a place of consensus. It would come from a place of deliberation. Because at the moment, the referendum is coming only from one place, and that's Remain, the call for a referendum. And the latest opinion poll published at the weekend, if voters were offered a choice between no deal or Remain, it's 51 in favour of Remain, 49 in favour of no deal. It's going to be another referendum is going to be as divisive as the last one. And the last one was the most divisive day in my country's history since the Second World War. One of our female MPs was murdered in the streets because of the campaign. And people were saying, we've got to do it again. And that's the only way out. So to me, a citizens' assembly would be a much more consensual way to try and deal with that. But sadly, as I say, people have talked about it. The Irish example has been given, but I suppose the idea of another referendum to undo the first one, I suppose I can see where the logic in that is. And although I'm not a big fan of it, if one comes, I will do everything I can to ensure that we get a Remain vote. But the polarisation in my country is shocking. It's not only that the debate is polarised, but during the European elections, the recent European elections, everybody either voted for the no dealers or the Remainers. Even the voters are totally polarised. The parties like Labour that were trying to talk about a middle way, they got slaughtered. This is very dangerous times. very dangerous times.
Thank you very much. You mentioned in your discussion that there has to be a third party who's going to decide on accountability. Who is that third party?
In what sense? You mean a third political party?
A third party, a third individual who's going to, when somebody performs, says something or says 2 and 2.
Well, no, I don't think. No, it wasn't so much a third party as I say that accountability works on different levels. You first, on a personal level, you've got to decide when you're debating with someone who you can't see, who's online. I mean, the great thing about you and I is we can see one another, and we make certain, because of our, you know, our basic fundamental humanity, we make certain, you know, we moderate what we say because we can see one another and respect one another. When you're online, that's gone, and the problem is you're in a private place in your bedroom or on your phone, but you're in a public forum, and people don't take on board that those two things work differently. So first of all, you have got to be the judge of the person that you're facing online. The second level, in a proprietorial accountability, then you've got to decide whether you want this person to say the things they're saying on your premises. If you're a landlord in a pub in England and some bloke comes in every Friday night and starts a fight, you've got every right to ban him. You've got every right to chuck him out for the benefit of the majority of the other clients, because he can come in and drink, he can come in and talk, he can even come in and swear, but he can't keep coming in and starting fights. So there's that level, the proprietary level. But then there also has to be a legal level. There has to be ultimately I believe there has to be, even in the United States under your constitution, I believe that hate speech, there is hate speech in your judicial system. Yeah. There has to be a line over which we can't accept people speaking. It's whether or not the severity of how we deal with that and what the sanctions are effective. Is being blocked effective, or does that angry person take their anger somewhere else? How do we diffuse that anger if that person won't listen to reason? We have, you know, these barbarians are going to keep coming at us. We've got to draw a line somewhere to stand together, sharpen our spears, and try to hold a particular line. And that's what accountability is. It's that line to say that, you know, you are going to be held accountable for your actions.
Well, that's the point. How do you determine that line? The ACLU has one line. Your attitude may have another line. And how do you determine that line to not inhibit free speech or suppress what journalists are saying? That's the real question here. Well, I think it's who makes that decision?
I think society ultimately has to make that decision. It's on a case-by-case basis, ultimately. I mean, you know, our laws, in my country, our constitution that doesn't exist is based on a bunch of knights who were trying to hold a king accountable in the 13th century. Now, they weren't left-wing radicals or anything. They were just fed up of being put in jail by King John. So they came up with this idea that no one is above the law. Be you ever so mighty, no one is above the law. And we have struggled in my country. We had our civil war was really a revolution. It was a revolution, and it was based on the idea that absolute monarchy must somehow be held to account. The absolute monarchy of the Stuarts, of Charles I, of James II. Our constitution and our constitutional settlement from 1688, our Bill of Rights. I mean, you know, never mind you Americans, we got this sorted out. You know, we chopped our king's head off 100 years before the French. We'd been there. Our problem was we did it before the likes of Thomas Paine, another Englishman, had come along with the idea of individual rights. The guys who chopped off Charles I's head were doing so on kind of, well, they didn't really have any choice. You know, he just kept on fighting. But it was a key moment. English history pivots on that moment of extreme accountability when they chop off Charles I's head. Before, policy is made by theology and by patronage and tradition. But after that moment, deliberation begins to take root. Democracy, the very first seeds of democracy are set. Sure, it doesn't work out. The monarchy comes back. Why doesn't it work out? Because no one was planning for a republic. They were just trying to get the king to just play ball with them. You know, so when the king does come back, he has to come back on their terms. And then when his brother, James II, won't play ball again, they sort him out. They sort it out. But they finally, you know, our constitution, our Bill of Rights is an agreement between the Crown and Parliament. It's not like your constitution that begins "we the people," and that's what we have that's missing, on account of the nature of our constitutional settlement, our attempt to deal with unaccountable power. In the 17th century, it was the monarchy. In the 21st century, it's neoliberalism. Capitalism is the great absolute power that we have to find a way to bring to heel. And that, I think, that is the real challenge, because it not only delivers the accountability that we're talking about, but it also addresses the question of agency and the sense that you know, the way the global economy has worked, it's taken power away from ordinary working people. And that's why I'm really pleased to see that the United Auto Workers have come out on strike for better rights, for better pay, and greater accountability in the workplace.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate.
All right.
On that note, please help me and thank Billy Bragg.
All right.
And thanks to David Weigel.